8:15?
Yeah.
Okay. Excuse me?
I hope you brought samples.
I was just trying to connect to the Wi-Fi.
Okay,
Do you know which network it is?
no, I don't. Now, maybe I have it on my,
I know the password. I asked Rita for the password.
didn't, Rabbi said that somebody was gonna help you?
Yeah, there's a gentleman here. But I
Because
just
I
don't see him.
don't know how the system works at all.
It's not crucial, but. No samples today, sorry.
Oh, okay, well, you got time.
Yeah.
How's it going in Fairlawn?
All good?
Good.
if in the end it's just you and me who are in person.
You know,
Assuming anybody.
what happens is, some meetings go, you know, you go out. So, something I might do, you know, the 3 o'clock class tomorrow, and I think those are on Zoom. That's nice, not.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine for me.
I didn't want to.
Very kind of you. I appreciate that.
You could do this from home.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
I was thinking of you last week during the election, when, you know, the Holocaust. You know, you talked about business people, the journalists, and the judiciary, they all follow through.
Well, that's, I mean, I don't know.
No. And the United States is a journalist.
Right. Like that.
But he couldn't have done it without them. So, yeah, I know you were 4 credits. How long do you think it will be?
I was gonna ask you, how long should I go?
Is, probably, I mean, if you get questions, I don't know, I mean, you get a lot on that. I would say. Because the topic is wonderful. Now,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
45 minutes. Time for
45.
questions, or
That's fine.
I'm not sure how long.
so it's only 2 more. I mean,
Well, no.
I mean,
It
what I
definitely
mean
won't
is-
be more than.
I mean, if it's, if you feel you're done at 45, you know, you don't have to. Actually, with the older congregation, your attention span is.
All of us, yeah. Yeah.
But I'm glad you, thank you for doing it.
It was good for me to try and put some of your thoughts down on paper. I've been thinking about some of these things for a while.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's something that's never been done before.
I do think that samples would be difficult. I was thinking the dessert one, the final one. That's the
Yeah.
one that's easy.
Well, you can bring them, and if nobody comes, it's just you and me.
Exactly. You and I can enjoy it.
You know, I was thinking, so, no, this was, first of all, I'm glad we got you teaching. Thank you so much for doing that. You were good. I mean, I still remember on trip down, you know, we spent, people from Florida.
Yeah.
And I was kind of interesting that you have to keep pointing out the places that you do have to do that. And now it's even something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a friend of ours, looking at, I think he wasn't around, and he had a bucket list, and one of his bucket list, that's his bucket.
Yes.
So, we went there, and, it's incredible. First of all, it's closed. They go to 18,000 pounds of,
Strawberry.
almost 15,000, strawberry, corned,
15
One
in
week.
out in a day?
no, 15,000 pounds. And
It's
then
not
just-
cheap now.
It was for a sandwich, which is a big sandwich.
Yeah.
$25. But, you know, that's really not too bad, because you bring half of it home and it's,
Yeah, I had a tuna salad sandwich today for $10, so I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
get $25 for tsunami. So is the Minion on the TV? How do we see the Minion?
it's on Zoom. I assumed it was here, but maybe, I think there's a shit house tonight, so they may be there. But normally I think it's, that's why I came, I thought.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought, with the menu, you get more people.
Right, that's what I thought too, right? That's why I said yes to in person.
You're working okay?
Yeah, it's all set. I mean, I turned off the screen just so that it was into the Minion.
You know how to turn that on?
Not.
Oh. No, I don't. There's someone doing it?
Yeah.
feel like going out tonight, Thorin, so I'm here for you. I'm here for you.
Oh, now there's a lot of pressure.
Uh-huh.
I pulled into the parking lot for one car. Oh, Florence.
Absolutely.
Anna's coming.
Oh, honestly.
Marcia
So-
told me she was gonna see me online.
Right, well, so it's going to be not Zoom, but live stream.
Right.
So we're not going to be able to see these. So there
Right.
can't be any interaction with it.
Yeah.
Oh, it is? It's not soon?
I'm hearing it's live stream, that's what it said on the, pretty sure, on the live stream. Because we're gonna try out our new, I guess they've done some, but we never had the ability to live stream from here.
Oh,
I'm willing to do anything, so.
I just
We
watched.
could Zoom.
Right,
Good
it's
news.
harder to Zoom
It is hard
because,
to do. I don't like
the camera for Zoom only shows
Yeah.
like, if we wanna look at you talking, then you can't really see anybody else.
Right, yeah.
And you have to look at the camera, so we have to sit there, you know,
Right,
whatever.
right.
So I'm looking at the subject of your classes, so I grew up in Stuyvesant Town, which is practically the Lower East Side.
Yep.
So, probably Ratner, Woodford, I lived in Bloxton.
My daughter-in-law, sister, Lucy, had a sister.
My brother still lives
Oh,
there.
does he?
Well, not still, he goes the other way, but.
Actually, I live streamed something just before it came to Central Avenue.
What if they
Some
had going on?
She was using it science, so they had David Wolfe,
Ah,
David Wolfe,
yeah, okay.
Brian Green, you know Brian Green, he's a professor at Columbia. He just did it. He's been on PBS, actually.
What was the topic?
He was on
Science.
And then they had this woman that was previously head of the CDC.
Was it the one under,
She's a young-
during COVID? No.
Yes, yes, she was there during COVID. I don't know if she's covered this, because she worked for the CDC. And, provided the theater.
Will the service appear?
Somebody, I don't know. Somebody ever turned it on, I guess that's what Alvaro is for. Letting people in, or do we
Yeah.
have to do that?
He's letting people in, but he turned on the TV. I don't know, he didn't seem to know what else he needs to do.
Yeah. You're supposed to be on there, so, I guess that it's the same, there's supposed to be
That's
a
the
camera
camera,
back,
yeah,
that's the camera
yeah.
for live stream.
Yeah,
So someone has to start it,
yeah, I would think,
so.
Yeah.
So Thorin, if your PowerPoint is on this screen.
yeah,
and
that
it's-
camera will catch it.
that's the camera for the.
That's the
Right.
live
Oh,
stream.
okay. I see, that's new. Is there a remote control? Hi, Lana.
Hello, hello,
Lana?
how are you?
Good. We're technologically challenged.
What can I help with?
We'd like to have the minion.
Minion's over,
Are the minions over?
it's 8:15.
Okay. We'd like to start the live stream in here.
Andy on the
Maybe
I
goes
think it
on
starts by
automatically.
itself.
Yeah, maybe it starts by itself automatically.
What time did they call the class for?
8:15.
So, and
They set it for a certain amount of time, that's like the live stream
Yeah,
at the synagogue, she'll say it'll start at 8:15 and
Yeah.
finish at 9:15, whatever they decide.
however,
But is there a way to tell if that camera's on? Or you think it should appear here?
I
let me
don't
see-
know,
let me see if
I
can-
really don't
Who
know
did
if this
who-
shows you or if you just start talking. Let me, wait,
Oh, yeah, click the link on the phone.
yes. I will click the link and see.
It'll pick up my voice, right? There's no microphone.
yeah.
There's a
I'm
microphone
calling option A.
somewhere.
to start live stream. We're here with Thorin in the synagogue. And the class is supposed to start at 8:15, and live stream is not doing anything.
Well, we don't know if it's doing
You're
anything.
gonna have to ask the rabbi.
Says in person or
He's
click here.
just finishing up Indian.
All right. I will try him.
I'm trying to help you, but I'm not sure what you're looking at.
Okay, I'll try the
Yep,
rabbi.
you're here, it's
Okay,
on,
never mind. Goodbye.
it's on, there's Thorin.
Yep, goodbye. That was very smart. Sandy.
Well, I figured it would show me.
Must be a way
You're
No, you're-
here and it doesn't show you there, but it shows you on the live stream screen. So the camera is
Think we're
showing.
ready to rock and roll?
However,
Audio?
no,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
off to one side here, you're not, keep moving.
Immediately right in front of the screen.
I don't know, he's not showing
Let's see.
still.
Can you see, you can
I
see
can
that?
see
though?
half of you.
How much of this can?
How about going over,
Yeah, can I go
move
on
it
that
over
side?
there?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. How come we don't see him on the-
Because it's delayed.
Oh, yeah, there's like
You need to open it, the screen.
a, is there some way to make that,
or-
is there a remote for the TV?
Yeah,
Is there a remote, because I think that maybe we can connect it to a source?
I'm not sure. Hello? Hold on, I can't hear you, let me, I'm sorry, the live stream's not working? It is fine, can you hear, are you watching? He moved over to the right of the screen. Can you see?
40-second delay?
I don't know.
Hour delay?
There's a delay. We are
Oh, yeah,
delayed.
Yeah.
We are delayed.
Can you see
There's
anything?
there's like a
Can you see
20-second or
anything?
30-second or minute delay.
Okay.
So you should see him in a
So
minute,
wait, you guys are gonna see it
Okay,
first?
because I can see him now.
Or they can see you.
Okay?
They can see you
But
now.
you have, okay, thank you, Janet. Okay.
Wait a minute. Stay on and
Yes,
see if they
yes,
can
it's
hear him when he
working.
talks.
Can we hear? Can you hear me? Well, you gotta wait 20 seconds to hear. You can hear me.
I think this is the-
Okay, I'm gonna hang up on
So
you.
you have no
Okay, bye.
idea how many you're listening?
We don't know that.
3.
That we won't know. For sure, 3.
Yeah.
And if we weren't here, you'd be talking to yourself.
Exactly. Top.
Well, if you were that bad, we could do it from home. You could Zoom it, right?
Yeah, maybe that's what we'll do next time. All right, we're gonna get started. Optimistically hoping that
Okay.
people can see and hear and are interested.
Marcia said she could see the screen. The live stream started, but you weren't.
It looked like I was kind of dark on that.
And she did it, and she did.
This will be a,
Ken said she couldn't hear
He
it.
said there is no delay. He doesn't have a mic.
is
Is there a mic somewhere?
mic over here? Should I use it? I don't know if this is,
No, no. It's not attached to anything.
wireless mic?
I don't know. Can you hear him at all? People, speak up. Can see him here, as is. Move slightly to his left, no delay. But you can't, can you hear?
Oh, these are the microphones.
yeah.
Okay,
That's
well,
the
hope that
mic.
I was just not speaking.
Where's the microphone up
This
there?
thing's sticking out.
Yeah, we have lots of mics in here.
Yeah, you can be heard too.
Right. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna start. Hopefully you can hear me. I wanted to thank Mark and the rabbi and the Adult Education Committee for their generosity in letting me come and talk. As some of you know, I'm a historian by training and have spent many years walking through the streets of the Lower East Side, and have a particular interest in the Jewish experience And I thought it might be interesting to look at food as a way of getting at the Jewish experience. As you know, I have 4 classes planned, which will look at several different types of Jewish food or Jewish restaurants. And I hope to look at them from a historical perspective. To some degree, I would say this will be nostalgic. Hello.
Looking for the
Hi, Herman,
executive
come on,
meeting.
come sit down.
The executive meeting? I can't give you that.
You look like an executive, so it has to be.
So these will somewhat be more nostalgic, but I hope that I'll be able to go deeper than just nostalgia and talk a little about the connections between some of these Jewish foods and Jewish businesses to the larger history of the Jewish immigration experience, and just kind of take it a couple of steps deeper. But I will add right from the get-go, you are guinea pigs. I have not given these talks before. I've thought about these for a long time, but it was actually the suggestion of the rabbi and Mark that made me pull these together. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to add, the big crowd in here is going to add to my knowledge and to our combined knowledge. And maybe we can have some discussion and such as well. Today, I want to start by talking about 2 particular types of Jewish restaurants: appetizing stores and kosher dairy restaurants, and draw attention to a couple of specific foods. But before I get to any of that, I want to talk about, I want to connect my mouse, that's what I want to do. I want to talk about what makes something a Jewish food, or what is Jewish food. Most food historians would say there's no such thing as Jewish food. There's no single country that Jewish food is connected to. And indeed, Jewish food is a descendant of the diaspora. Wherever Jews went, Jews adapted to the food in those countries and changed the food in those countries. One Jewish historian said that Jews have been thrown out of all the best food countries on the planet, and thus Jewish cuisine has been influenced by all those many places. Are Jewish foods the ones that are from somehow inherently Jewish places? Is that how to understand what a Jewish food is? What about a food that was altered or transformed by Jews when they arrived in some country? Is that Jewish food? And what about kashrut? Is all kosher food Jewish? Does food have to be kosher to be Jewish? How do those things fit together? These are some of the questions that I was wondering. I don't have the answers. So I'm curious about your thoughts in the room and yours out there who I can't hear. What do you think makes Jewish food?
Jews eat it.
Yeah, that's certainly a pretty straightforward definition. Jews eat it, and then it's Jewish food. But that's a very broad definition, for sure, right? I was thinking about, let's say something like challah. Challah, it would be hard to say that's not Jewish, and yet I go to the diner in Tenafly, that's, I think, Greek, and there it is, challah French toast, right? They make their French toast out of challah. People are eating it who have no connection to Judaism, don't know anything about Jews, never had a Shabbat dinner or a Friday night dinner, but is challah Jewish? For sure.
Are we talking about just Ashkenazic Jewish food, or?
No, for sure
Sephardic
not.
and
Yeah,
Mizrahi
add in
Jewish food?
Sephardic, yeah. Or I was thinking also about jelly donuts. All right, we're coming up to Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Sufganiyot, Jewish food, right? Sure. But when I go to Dunkin' Donuts and get a jelly donut, there's a kosher Dunkin' Donuts in Teaneck. Is that a Jewish food when I have a jelly donut
No,
in
only if it's
February? Right. Or smoked salmon. You know, what's more Jewish than a bagel, cream cheese, smoked salmon? We're going to talk about those things next week, by the way. But yet, you know, Norwegians have been smoking salmon before there were any Jews around in Norway, and plenty of other places as well. So what makes a food Jewish? I don't have an answer for you. Yeah.
If your bubby cooked it, you associate it with being a Jewish food.
Yep.
It may not be, quote, and maybe there's nothing really Jewish, but, you know, there were certain kind of kreplach, But every country has, so many other countries have something like a kreplach, a
Yeah.
wonton, or a dumpling.
I
or-
thought about having a class just on dumplings, yeah,
Right.
kreplach, wonton, yeah, everybody's got them. But the kreplach is a little different, right? than-
Simis. If it has a Yiddish name, it's a
No, but I
Jewish
think,
food.
yeah, so what I came up with were Jewish foods are those that have developed a Jewish profile because of the people or places that made them famous, or that made us know them. So because my bubby made it, you know, because it was something that was available in the Jewish neighborhood in Toronto, or, you know, wherever it is, that's what makes it Jewish. And I think we could probably agree, despite the fact that I've suggested all these problems with the term defining what Jewish food is, I bet we could all agree what are Jewish foods. And certainly we have a number of them that we can all agree on. Maybe there's some fringe items that we would disagree about, but I think we would mostly agree about what's a Jewish food. We know it, we feel it. The comedian and critic Lenny Bruce said, Kool-Aid is Goyish. Evaporated milk, Goyish, even if the Jews invented it. Chocolate is Jewish. Fudge, Goyish. Pumpernickel is Jewish, and as you know, white bread is Goyish. I'm not sure how he came up with these. He also said, if you live in New York or any other big city, you're Jewish. It doesn't matter even if you're Catholic. If you live in New York, you're Jewish. If you live in Butte, Montana, you're going to be Goyish, even if you're
That
Jewish.
was Rabbi Wiener, that turned them off.
However, if you live in Whitefish, Montana, then,
Right.
and the former rabbi of the New Milford Jewish Center lives in Whitefish,
Oh,
Montana.
I thought you were just saying Whitefish, Montana would
Yeah,
be like
there is a
living in
place.
Kreplach, Ohio, you know?
There's a real place, and our former
Yeah.
rabbi lives there.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I would agree with Lenny Bruce's food designations, and I don't agree that everyone living in New York is Jewish, but there's no doubt that the number of Jews who settled in New York had a tremendous impact on New York culture and New York cuisine. I'm hoping that these people are calling to say they can hear.
This Rabbi Wiener, he tried calling me and I cut him off.
Okay. I hope you can hear people. The reason why New York cuisine was impacted, shaped by the Jewish experience is simply one out of numbers. I mean, if you just look at the statistics of immigration, they tell you that there was going to be a Jewish impact in New York. In the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, this area here on this chart,
I'm in class now.
they show that there was a surge in the number of immigrants coming into America. Good news, Sandy?
Good news, Rabbi says everything's working
Oh,
great.
good, okay.
Oh, okay.
So in the 1860s, 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, a big wave of German immigrants and Irish, but German immigrants come into America, largely into New York. A massive wave of German Jews come as part of that. And you can see, just in this period between 1820 and 1880, 3 million immigrants from the German Empire, many of them Jews, settling in America and in New York. But that's followed by a much larger wave of immigration in the 1880s and 90s. And again, here you can see the much larger uptick in numbers of immigrants coming into America, and not from Germany, but instead from the Russian Empire and from Austria-Hungary, and you get many more immigrants coming in. This one gives you some numbers. In the 1850s, 60s, 70s, we're talking about 3 million immigrants coming into America every decade. By the 1880s, it surges up to 5 million, then drops down again. But then the first decade, 1900 to 1910, 8 million immigrants come into America in that one period of 10 years. And the great majority come through New York, and you see it in the stats of New York City's population. Between 1860 and 1880, New York City grows by almost 50%. The city overall, 800,000 to 1.2 million total population. But the Jewish population during that period jumps by 3 times, from 17,000 to 80,000 residents who are Jewish. But that's nothing compared to 1910, 1 million Jews living in a city of 4.7 million, By 1920, 1.6 million Jews in New York City, 28%. More than 1 of every 4 people walking on the street in New York are Jews. It is incredible. And with those kind of numbers, not surprisingly, Jewish businesses blossom, Jewish stores, Jewish food shapes New York City. As I said when I started, I want to talk about a few iconic Jewish restaurants that reflect different aspects of the Jewish experience during these years. I'm clearly not going to talk about all Jewish restaurants, not even all famous Jewish restaurants, all iconic Jewish restaurants, let alone all foods or any of that stuff. I'm taking a small sample. I want to focus on a few that I think tell a larger story about Jewish history and Jewish culture. And I want to start with several Jewish food stores located in 2 different neighborhoods in New York, Russ and Daughters on Houston Street, Barney Greengrass, Murray Sturgeon Shop, and Zabar's on the Upper West Side. Some might refer to these as delis. I would say no. I'm going to have another class on delis. I think of delis as a place where you get a meat sandwich. We'll talk more about delis. I think these are different. Yes, you can get meat in Zabar's. Yes, you can get meat, I think, even in Murray's Sturgeon Shop. But these are places whose roots go back to smoked fish and salted fish. And they're not the same thing as the meat delis that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. These 4 stores do fit into a different category. And I want to run through these 4 stores, a little about the history of these 4 stores, these 4 businesses, and then try and pull something together from them. So, to begin with, Russ and Daughters. Russ and Daughters, founded by Joel Russ, who immigrated to America in 1907. When I was reading up on histories of Russ and Daughters and Joel Russ, I actually saw a number of dates of when he supposedly came to America. So I went back to the sources, and if you've heard any of my talks in the past, you know what I love to talk about. I went back to, well, there's Joel, a little later. I went back to the shipping manifests, which I do enjoy so much. And sure enough, there he is, Joel Russ. He arrived in 1907, January 19th, 1907, on the SS Kaiserin August Victoria. This was a massive ship, in fact, the largest passenger ship in the world in 1907. It was launched the previous year in 1906. It was named for the wife of the German emperor, and it could accommodate, notably, 472 first-class passengers, 174 second-class passengers, 212 third-class passengers, and steerage-class passengers, the poorest immigrants like Joel Russ, who came over in it. I thought I know this is a blind guess, but if you think that this ship had 858 high-paying ticket purchasers, first, second, and third class, how many steerage-class passengers do you imagine would have been squeezed onto this ship if it could take 858 high-paying customers?
About 1,000.
1,608, yeah. So about the same number as all the high-paying tickets, 800 something, double that, that's the number who came in steerage. This was a luxury liner. I could have shown you pictures of the lounges and stuff that were designed by some famous interior designer, the elaborate woodwork, the marble, etc. This was a luxurious way to travel, but not for Joel Russ and not for the steerage class passengers. But such a passenger ship saw it was profitable to take 1,600 steerage class passengers in addition, because they were traveling at the lowest level of the ship, where nobody else, they didn't have the shipping line could make more from carrying people than it could from cargo. And so that's what it did. Now, I don't have the ticket prices for Joel Russ's voyage, but on the Titanic, which was right around the same time, the most expensive cabin, first class, luxurious, the biggest cabin, cost about $5,000, which was equivalent to $150,000 today. But your standard first class cabin, $150, which was equivalent to about $5,000 today. So not an inconsiderable amount of money. Second class on the Titanic, $60, $2,000 today. and the steerage class passengers $25 to $30, so around $1,000 today. Still a lot of money if you think about it, but 1/5 of the price of the standard first class cabin. They weren't paying as much, but you could pack a whole lot more of them into the ship. So Joel Russ comes steerage class, the bottom of the boat. And getting back to his manifest, his name is actually listed on an interesting page of the ship's manifest. It says record of detained aliens. Now, about 20% of all immigrants passing through Ellis Island were detained for some period of time. 20%. So it's not strange that Joel Russ might fall into that large category. Most people were detained to meet a family member. The United States government was concerned that immigrants weren't going to be able to pay their own way. They were going to become what's called a public charge. And so the federal government felt much safer if there was a family member here who met them and took would say they would pay their bills. This was often the case with unaccompanied women and children. But unaccompanied women who came on to Ellis Island, they were detained, and some man or family member had to come and meet them.
But that was only for steerage passengers.
That's true. That was only for steerage class passengers. First, second class passengers, they were expected to return any necessary paperwork, and they were just free to land. But the steerage were brought out to Ellis Island to go through the process and were the ones who were detained. So even though Joel Russ was 23 years old, not a child, and a man, he was still detained for some reason on the island. And actually, if you look closely at what it says, it has his name, the name of the immigrant. It says what page he is on the ship's manifest, although that was lost apparently because I couldn't find it. It says that he was traveling alone, not with little kids, not with other people. He was traveling by himself. And it says cause of detention. And then underneath it, it says to BIL. The cause of detention is really a misnomer here. What they're really saying is, who was this person released to? And BIL stands for brother-in-law. So he was met by his brother-in-law. His sister Annie had come over previously, married some guy, and he was met by his brother-in-law. And then if you continue on, it says the disposition, this is where he's going to go. He's going to Annie Even, this is his sister, who lives at 74 Gorick Street. Gorick Street was down on the Lower East Side. It no longer exists. It's where the Baruch houses are today. But that's where he was going. It also has the name of the inspector, the date and the time of when he's released. Looks like about 2 p.m. maybe on the 19th. And it has the number of breakfasts, dinners, and suppers that he took. The reason why the federal government collected this information was because the shipping line that brought the passenger over was billed for any meals served on Ellis Island. So they recorded that he had one dinner. And the shipping line, the Kaiserin August, whatever her name was.
Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah. Victoria, they were billed for his one supper. So he wasn't detained for long, probably not overnight. He didn't have a breakfast or a dinner. So he wasn't detained for very long, but a couple of hours was enough to have him separated from everybody else. He wasn't just free to land, and so his name is reported. Okay, I realize that's all a bit of a diversion, again, because I so much enjoy these documents. Joel Russ was met by his sister and apparently started working with her. She had a pickled herring business of some sort, and so he worked with her. Some accounts say that he toted Polish mushrooms into the Lower East Side and sold Polish mushrooms initially from some kind of tabletop or stool. Others say he sold his sister's herring. Whatever he did initially, all accounts agree that after a couple of years, he had saved up enough money to buy a pushcart. Now, I normally think of the pushcart as the starting block, the lowest way to sell, the cheapest way to sell. But his story emphasizes that it was not the cheapest way to sell. You had to save up to get a pushcart. He could just sell off, a corner or something that he held, and that's what he did. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but we'll see. This is a film made in 1901 by the Thomas Edison Film Company, showing you what they called the ghetto fish market in New York. Most scholars think this is probably the Hester Street pushcart market. We'll see. Here we go. It's a silent movie, So I'm going to talk while it goes on. It's not all that exciting, although it's pretty amazing to think that somebody was filming the pushcart market and showing. This is the fish section of the pushcart market, clearly. It's a little hard to see, but these tables are full of fish, some in barrels, some on flat tables, some of salted, some cold, some fresh, all kinds of different types. Apparently,
Refrigerated, because there was no
yeah,
refrigeration.
it's hard to tell the temperature,
They had ice.
but apparently a large portion, we'll talk more about pushcarts later, but a large portion of the vendors in the pushcart market down on Hester Street were selling fish because it was in high demand. You needed your protein, and this was a way to get it. Anyway, in 1914, 7 years after arriving in New York, Joel Russ opens J. Russ International Appetizers, a storefront originally on Orchard Street, just south of Houston. And then 6 years later, in 1920, he moves on to Houston Street, 179 Houston Street, where the store continues to operate today. The business gained its current name in 1935. Joel and his wife had 3 daughters, no sons, Hattie, Ida, and Annie, or Anne. The daughters all worked for the father, worked in the family business from about age 8 upwards. Initially just a few hours or some small time, but by the time they graduated high school, they all became full-time employees at the fish shop. In 1935, Joel made his 3 daughters, who he referred to as the Sturgeon Queens, full partners, and he changed the name to Russ and Daughters to reflect that combined family ownership. His decision apparently was not based on some high ideals of equality or women's rights, but it was based on the fact that he was concerned about what was going to happen to his family business. He wanted it to continue. He passed it down to his daughters. That was the next generation who was going to take it over. He wasn't going to live forever, and he wasn't going to run it forever, but he wanted the store to continue. I will add that it was the first business, apparently, in America that was called something and Daughters. The more familiar and Son or and Sons existed in plenty of places, but this was the first and Daughters. The business has continued, still around today. In the early 2000s, it was operated by Ann's son, that's Joel Russ's grandson, Mark Fetterman, and his wife, Maria. Mark explained that his mother and his aunts didn't have much of a social life. He said, for one thing, they were too tired after long days in the shop. For another, they recognized that they smelled a bit too fishy. Still, they did find husbands. Mark Fetterman also added that his grandfather evaluated potential son-in-laws with the following questions. Was he strong enough to schlep barrels of herring? Was he smart enough to add up a column of numbers on a brown paper bag? Could he make change? And would he look good behind the counter? If his daughters answered yes for their potential husbands, he agreed and he would say, fine, marry him. I think you'll agree it's a rare thing for a business to go into the 2nd or 3rd generation, let alone the 4th generation, and that's the case at Russ and Daughters. According to Mark Fetterman, grandson, he said most of the 20 or 30 other fish businesses that once populated the neighborhood around Houston Street didn't make it past the 2nd generation because, in his words, nobody wanted their kids in the business. They wanted the kids to do something better, more, become a doctor, a lawyer, etc. Fetterman himself went to Georgetown Law School, trained as a lawyer, but he said, the first day I took up my place behind the counter was the last day I practiced law. His daughter Nikki, is now the proprietor along with her cousin Josh Ross Tupper. Fetterman did explain what he said were the keys to the success of this business. He said the 2 qualities that that Joel Russ had, that he had, that made it possible for this business to succeed: slicing and schmoozing. Obviously, you had to be able to slice the salmon or the sable thin and cleanly, but also you had to schmooze to the point, he said, the best schmoozing was if you would talk to somebody, they would leave, they'd come in a week later, and you'd continue the conversation right from then on. Like they just walked back out and walked in the same second. You had to remember who they were, the story you'd had with them, so you could follow right up. He knew his customers, and that was what was important. Schmoozing was part of that, but he knew his customers. All right, so that's a little about Russ and Daughters. Let me jump up to the Upper West Side. 3 stores: Barney Greengrass, Murray's Sturgeon Shop, and Zabar's. You might wonder, why would these stores, these Jewish businesses, start in the Upper West Side? And they all did. They didn't start somewhere down in Lower Manhattan and move uptown. They all started uptown. And the answer really is that while we know about the Jewish enclave of the Lower East Side, the fact is Jews started moving out of the Lower East Side in the 1890s. And certainly after the New York City subway opened in 1904, there was a massive movement of Jews uptown. Even before the subway, which is marked in red, the original route of the New York City subway, which started down at City Hall and went up to the Upper West Side, provided a direct route, but there were elevated trains marked in blue that again started down in the Lower East Side and could carry people northward. And so for immigrants living in the Lower East Side who had jobs down there, they quickly realized that for only a nickel a day, they could ride on the elevated trains or in the subway and live in much nicer housing further uptown and commute back to their old jobs back in the same neighborhood. So they didn't need to live and work in the same neighborhood.
About when did that start?
The elevated trains go up beginning in the 1870s, and the subway 1904.
Oh, wow.
And here's the real stat. 1892, 75% of Jews in New York live down in Lower Manhattan. By 1904, it's only 50%. And by 1916, 23%, less than a quarter. So Jews are moving out of that neighborhood right away. If you could move out, why would you stay there? Why would you stay in a dark, dank tenement building? And I won't even go into the housing laws, but you could find better housing than was built down there. There were also synagogues. If you look at where synagogues are built, there's a whole range of synagogues that appear in the Upper West Side in the 1890s and early 1900s. Sha'arit Yisrael is the first one in 1872, moves to Central Park West and 72nd Street, but a number of other ones move up there. The Jewish community, there is a Jewish community that's moving up there. And with the Jewish population came Jewish restaurants and Jewish stores. Barney Greengrass originally opens even further north on 113th and St. Nicholas in 1908. Barney Greengrass said that he decided to open the store after learning the business from a man named Morris Cohen from the Lower East Side. So even though Barney didn't start his store on the Lower East Side, its roots are in the Lower East Side with the guy who trained him. In 1929, he moved south from 113th down to 86th in Amsterdam, where the store continues to be today. At the time, that's the period of the Black migration. It's when Harlem is emerging as an African-American neighborhood. And I don't know specifically that that's why Barney wanted to leave, but the neighborhood was changing up on 113th. He moves down to 86th. Like Russ and Daughters, the business has been passed down through family members. So even before Barney died in 1956, his son Marvin Mo Greengrass had taken over, leading Barney Greengrass to actually change the name of the business to Barney Greengrass and Son, although later took away the and Son. And when Mo died in 2001, his son Gary took it over. That's Gary right there. Mo's obituary in the New York Times describes the business. The restaurant on Amsterdam Avenue at 86th Street is a place where today's reality, heaping platters of lox served in a setting of peeling wallpaper and fluorescent lights, suggests an Upper West Side that is becoming mythical, one where Isaac Bashevis Singer liked the lake sturgeon and Irving Berlin ordered 4 quarts of borscht a week, among a pantheon of other customers, Franklin D. Roosevelt and Marilyn Monroe. So a place that, even in 2001, was a strange mixture of delicious food, but a pretty plain atmosphere, but an amazing clientele, all mixed together. Just a few blocks from Barney Greengrass, Murray's Sturgeon Shop, a relative latecomer. It opens 1945. It's only, 80 years old. Opened by Murray Bernstein and later his brother Sam, who became co-owners. They were originally born in Poland, but come to America in the 1930s to avoid or escape the anti-Semitism that was already emerging with the rise of Hitler next door. The business has stayed in place. The family has actually sold that business, and it's moved to other owners. But it's an iconic, still much the same as it was, 50 years ago. You walk in, not much has changed. And the third iconic store, the one probably the most famous of the Upper West Side, Trio Zabar's, established in 1934 by Louis and Lillian Zabar. Louis Zabar was born in 1901 in what's now the Ukraine. His name at the time was Mordko Lieb Zabarka. His father, Shlomo, was in the food trade business and very successful, but they suffered under the fact that they were Jews in Russia or part of Ukraine. In the fall of 1920, September 1920, Bolshevik troops were retreating through the town, Ostropolia, where they lived. A group of Cossacks allied with the Russian army arrested the town's Jewish leaders and extorted money from them. They stayed hanging around in the town. Several soldiers, they looted stores, stole whatever they wanted, and then a group marched into the Zabarka house and demanded money from Shlomo. Louis's father apparently was happy to pay. He said, yeah, take my money. He wanted these soldiers out. But after they took the money, they started looking at his wife, at Louis's mother, Malka. And Shlomo stepped in between the soldiers and his wife. One of the soldiers got angry, pulled out a sword, and stabbed him and killed him. In the resulting violence, one of Louis's sisters also was killed, and Louis was forced to flee. First into hiding, then people were looking for him, the Russians were looking for him, the troops were looking for him, because he tried to defend some of his family. He escapes to Warsaw, and then in 1921, with the help of the Joint Distribution Committee, he comes to Canada. Always with the hope of trying to get to New York, where he had some family. 1 year later, 1922, he crosses the border in a car, drives down to New York, and settles in Brooklyn, where he rented a small farmer's market stall selling fruits and vegetables. He marries Lillian Heidelbaum in 1927, a woman who he had actually met and knew from Ostropolia. They had both come here. She had come through Philadelphia. They met in Brooklyn. They got married. And they used their savings in 1934 to open a new store on the Upper West Side on 80th Street and Broadway. Louis had developed a rash because of what he believed were some of the chemicals that were on the fruits and vegetables that he was constantly washing and dealing with. So when he opens the new store, he says, I'm out of the fruit and vegetable business. He had found that by dunking his arms in pickling liquid, like pickled herring, it soothed the rash on his arms. And so he said, I'm good, we'll go to fish. And that's how he started his business at Zabar's, with pickled herring. The thing that helped Zabar's was really luck in some ways. He opens a store on the Upper West Side at a time when the neighborhood is booming. And through the 30s and 40s and 50s, the Upper West Side booms. And so he benefits. From the beginning, he said he was kosher style. It was never a kosher restaurant or business. But as the neighborhood changed, he even embraced having pork products, things that he wouldn't have had early on. By the time Louis Zabar died in 1950, he owned 10 different stores up and down Broadway on the Upper West Side. He had been very successful. After his death, his three sons, two of his sons, Saul and later Stanley, and then later Eli, they took over the business. But Saul found running from store to store up and down these 10 different stores, it was too much for him. So as the leases lapsed on the businesses, Saul let them go. And by the early 1960s, Saul focused his energies on one store, Zabar's, then just a single storefront. Today covers all of these stores. But Saul focused on this and said he changed it, he adapted it. In particular, he knew that he couldn't just focus on the Jewish market, so he didn't take away things that his father had sold, but he added gourmet foods that were becoming in vogue because increasingly in the 1960s, people were taking air travel, traveling to Europe, being exposed to more varied cuisines. He starts selling mustards, oils, whole grain breads, spices, coffee. And he gets a bigger crowd. He doesn't get success. In fact, the store was losing money in 1961 to the point where Saul Zabar put the store up for sale. He was losing money, he couldn't keep at it, but nobody wanted to buy it. The savior came in the form of Murray Klein, a 39-year-old former employee who Saul and Stanley brought back to run the day-to-day operations in 1961. According to Stanley's daughter, Murray was a retail savant with a talent for both buying and selling food and appliances, and instead of creating a spare, elegant, and luxurious atmosphere, Murray stocked the store to its limits, hanging pots and pans, strings of garlic, salamis, tea kettles, everything from the ceiling to create the sense of chaotic yet exciting, a chaotic yet exciting food bazaar. He said apparently if he could see his shoes as he walked through the store, he was upset. He wanted everything to be everywhere. And by the mid-1960s, Zabar's had become a fashionable place to shop for both gourmet offerings and traditional Jewish appetizing. Lori Zabar says that her father de-ghettoized Jewish food at Zabar's. He integrated the Jewish food with other items so that the place crossed over markets. It wasn't just Jews, it was everybody was coming and shopping there. And that clearly helped the business thrive. Today, the business is still owned by Saul and Stanley, although other members are involved as well. Okay, so what do we got? We got all these 4 stores. Yes, nice stories. How do we pull these together? All 4 of these businesses are a category of store that was once known as the appetizing store. You can still see it on the name of Russ and Daughters. This was a type of store that did not exist in Europe, but became a mainstay of Jewish food shopping in New York. More than 500 appetizing stores covered New York City by 1930. That's about the same number as Starbucks and McDonald's are in Manhattan today. So there were a lot. They were everywhere, these Jewish appetizing stores. And they owe their existence, obviously, to the Jewish population, to the laws of kashrut, and to the American economy. I say kashrut because many kosher immigrants who flooded into New York, they were in search of parv foods that could be eaten as an appetizer with either a meat or a milchik meal. And they turned to stores who specialized in parv food. This photo from the inside of Russ and Daughters from 1940 gives you a sense of what they carried. Cans of, all kinds of cans of fish, of canned fish, sardines, herring, tuna, whatever. I mean, just massive platters of smoked fish that they would slice and cook and slice, as well as dried fruit, roasted nuts, sometimes baked goods. That was at the heart of what these businesses were. And it's certainly true that the immigrants who settled in the Lower East Side would have wanted kosher parv food just as much as they wanted it in New York, but many of the shtetls of Eastern Europe were still, in the early 20th century, based on a barter economy, not a cash economy. There would have been in the small towns a butcher, baker, some other stores, but much smaller population densities, and a lack of capital, no cash to buy various different food sources. America was different. New York was different. 500,000 Jews living in the Lower East Side alone was a huge market for these kosher foods, and people were being paid in cash. The American cash economy meant it was possible to accumulate capital and then start a store where you could sell these things. But I should be clear that these kinds of businesses did not grow up overnight. They didn't spring up instantaneously. They sprang out of, mostly, the pushcart markets, like in the case of Joel Russ. The pushcarts were indeed the first way that Jewish immigrants sold. And not only Jewish, all immigrants. This is how immigrants sold. It was cheaper. I'm running out of time, but I will say that they were benefits that everybody could benefit from. Lower overhead, mobile, and autonomy. That enabled the pushcart to thrive.
Did they do this like in the winter and in the rain? And
Yeah, all weather. It was in 1938 that Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia gets rid of the pushcart markets, he's had complaints from the people you'd imagine he would have complaints from. People who are trying to drive through the streets in cars by the 1930s. They find the pushcart market's a problem. Store owners say these pushcart peddlers are underselling us. Then there were concerns about whether the peddlers were ripping people off, that the scales were not being overseen properly, and taxes. Were the pushcart peddlers paying their taxes in the same way that a store owner was forced to keep records and pay their taxes? And so in 1938, Mayor LaGuardia gets rid of the pushcart markets in New York. This is what he said: "It's my policy where a market is necessary to build a proper covered market, so that these peddlers may be permanently placed in such a market under proper and wholesome sanitary conditions." The result, the Essex Street markets, new building built by the city on Delancey and Essex. Up on 2nd Avenue and 10th Street, another set of markets. New building for the Fulton Fish Market. All these places, the city builds them, the peddlers go indoors. But then they lose the benefits of peddling. They're no longer mobile, not so much autonomous. And so you see store owners emerging, or stores emerging in the 1930s as peddlers decide that it's not worth it to stay a peddler. None of the four businesses that I talked about really are tied back directly to this law and the passage of the closing of the pushcart markets, but they all are tied back to the pushcart markets. And to me, I guess my three things about these four businesses, they connect back to the pushcarts. They all benefited from the economic niche created by kashrut, and they were sustained by being passed down from family to family member. To some degree, all four of these stores are the outliers. There were thousands of these businesses that closed. These four survived. The majority of the businesses that were appetizing stores didn't make it. These ones did. So they're the kind of different ones, but still, they're the window in to that past. All right, I know I have a few more minutes. I know we're running long, but I'm just going to jump to it quickly. The other business I want to talk about is dairy, kosher dairy restaurants. And the most famous, Ratner's. Ratner's closed about 20 plus years ago, 2002. Still widely remembered not only for its blintzes, onion rolls, but also its attitude. A former waiter captured some of the character. He wrote it, "Ratner's character was the top item on the menu. From the rude waiters who'd stick their thumbs into your split pea soup, apparently it was a cure for arthritis, to the little old ladies who'd steal the onion rolls off the table. Waiters as old as Methuselah limped around with side towels stashed in their armpits and a snide remark on their lips. Their hearing aids didn't work, so if you ordered potato pancakes, there was a high likelihood you'd get served gefilte fish, and you'd better like it." By the 1970s, 80s, Ratner's was one of the last big kosher dairy restaurants in the Lower East Side, but it grew out of earlier efforts. The conventional story is that Ratner's was founded in 1905 on Pitt Street by Jacob Harmatz, his brother Harry, and his brother-in-law Alex Ratner. They supposedly flipped a coin to decide on whose name would be on the store, and Ratner won. After 13 years together, Alex Ratner later sold his share in the restaurant to the Harmatz brothers, and in 1918, they went their separate ways, establishing Ratner's at 138 Delancey Street, that's where Jacob went, and Harry opened Ratner's at 111 2nd Avenue. The actual story is more complicated. I'm not going to go into it, but let me just say, this was not their first business. They owned a number of businesses before they got together in 1917 and pooled their $5,000 in 1917 to create a new company. And it seems more likely than tossing a coin that Ratner's was the more established name, that people had heard of the businesses. His family had 4 different restaurants, so maybe that's why they went with the Ratner's name. That's my own conjecture. The bottom line is they did a bunch of stuff, and in the end, they did. They opened 2 Ratner's. Harry and Jacob went their separate ways in 1919, maybe it was 1920. Harry Harmatz opens the location up on 2nd Avenue, which opened a little earlier than the one down on Delancey, but right about the same time. And at least in the 50s and 60s, the Ratner's on 2nd Avenue was the more successful one, particularly after the Fillmore East opened right next door. But It closes in 1975, 1974, and the one on Delancey is the last one standing. But Ratner's, when it opens in 1919, is one of hundreds of kosher dairy restaurants. Rappaport's on 91 2nd Avenue is another famous one that people may have heard of that closed in 74. Steinberg's Dairy up on Broadway, uptown, closed in 1969. The Garden Cafeteria down on Essex and East Broadway closes in 1983. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. These are 60 that I was able to pull together pretty quickly that all were around from before 1925. This was a massive wave of restaurants, kosher dairy restaurants. Ratner's was one of hundreds. Obviously, the reason why kosher dairy restaurants flourished is because there was a kosher Jewish population that wanted dairy food. But there are other reasons, 3 other reasons that I think are important. One, maybe we don't remember it today, but in the early 1900s, we were worried about the safety of meat. Maybe you remember Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, 1906, that highlights the unsanitary conditions in the slaughterhouses. A year after 1905, 1906 is when the federal government under Theodore Roosevelt passes the first Meat Inspection Act, which mandates that post-mortems of every animal carcass killed are looked at, and that sets standards for the sanitary conditions in slaughterhouses, among a whole range of new protections. Jacob Harmatz, the founder of Ratner's, described in an interview in 1940 what had sparked his interest in opening his first dairy restaurant in 1905. He said, stirred by recurrent epidemics of stomach ailments that had befallen unwary patrons of third-rate meat establishments, and out of a desire to be helpful, he opened a dairy eating place at 87 Pitt Street with an investment of $150. His motivation, he said, had to do with how dangerous meat was and the fact that it was a place where people could get sick. Meat restaurants, people got sick. In addition to the concerns about meat safety, New York had a particular set of riots between 1902 and 1916 in the Lower East Side, Jewish women in particular who were upset about price gouging from the butchers. Meat was expensive. A second factor, meat was expensive. If you were going to open a restaurant and you're trying to cater to a large population, meat probably not the way to go. And then third, it was apparently much easier to get a hechsher for a kosher dairy restaurant than for a kosher meat restaurant. This was the period before many of the organizations that created hechshers or even federal oversight. New York State in 1915 is the first state in the country to pass a kosher food law that mandates that you can't sell stuff that's not kosher and call it kosher. First law in the country is in New York in 1915. The OU, the first time the OU was actually put on any food, 1923 on a Heinz vegetarian beans, 1923. So, that's several years after Ratner's opened. So mostly people got local rabbis to give them a hechsher. And the local rabbis were much more concerned about meat restaurants. That's where you really had to be careful. If you had no meat in your place, then it was pretty easy to get yourself called kosher and get accepted. So those 4 factors, rising Jewish population, safety concerns about meat, the high cost of meat in general, particularly for the poor immigrants in the Lower East Side, and the relative ease of getting approved for a kosher dairy restaurant, they all made it possible for that boom in kosher dairy restaurants. I'm going to finish by showing the Ratner's menu from 1953. I love this menu. First of all, you can tell that they have all kinds of stuff. Soup, eggs, dairy dishes, vegetarian, hot dishes. They got it all. You can tell it's 1953 because they printed their menu every day. August 10th, 1953. It's printed on the menu. That tells how successful Ratner's was by the 1950s. By this time, they were open 24 hours a day, and they're open until 1975. They're open 24 hours a day. They have seating for 350 people almost in the restaurant. The other thing, I found this fascinating. This is a dairy restaurant, but this is the dairy dishes. Obviously the whole thing is dairy, but they highlight some dairy dishes. Matzah brai, you can get that year-round, although you got to order it 10 minutes early or whatever. Noodle chop suey with kasha. Some mixing of cultures that I love to see. Or the cream dishes. Just a pot of sour cream, 55 cents. Or sour cream with everything. Sour cream with cheese, sour cream with peaches, sour cream with vegetables. Everything's better when you put sour cream with it.
That's why these people have heart attacks.
They had other issues to worry about, not cholesterol. Ratner closes in 2002. Many people saw it as the death of the Lower East Side. And they were sad about it. People said, the death of Ratner's, oh my goodness, what's happened to the Jewish Lower East Side? It's over. But the Jews were leaving the Lower East Side in 1905. You know, or much even earlier before that, as I showed those stats. So people had been moving out, and they'd been moving out because they wanted to move out to better housing. So 2002, the Lower East Side had changed from a Jewish neighborhood many, many years before Ratner's closed in 2002. And in general, my view is the death of the Jewish Lower East Side and the closing of Ratner's are signs of the success of Jews rather than anything negative. Jews decided, hey, I've got more money, I'm going to move out to the Paramus. You know, why should I live in New York? But an earlier sign retrospectively that we can see of Ratner's decline came in 1975 when they published a very successful cookbook. I say a sign of decline because if you lived in the neighborhood, could walk down the street to get the matzah brie or the onion rolls, you don't need a recipe book to tell you how to make them. It's only because people had moved out of that neighborhood so many years earlier that they wanted the recipes because they weren't going down to the store. The fact is, Ratner's was incredible because of its longevity. It starts selling to the local Jewish community, new immigrants who had moved into the neighborhood in 1905. In 2002, it's selling to the great-grandchildren of those families who moved out to the suburbs and want to come back every weekend or a couple of times a year to see the old neighborhood. That's how long it lasted. I was going to talk about a couple of beverages and some food items. On their beverage list, they include Postum. Was not familiar with it. Maybe you guys recall it.
Yeah.
And I love the celery tonic, Dr. Brown's celery tonic. Postum, invented in 1895, is one of the early caffeine-free beverages, and 1912 becomes an instant. So if you want a caffeine-free drink. Dr. Brown's, I mean, I grew up in the 1970s. My father loved Dr. Brown's cream soda. He actually put cream in the cream soda.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. But I remember when I saw the first time celery soda, I was like, what the heck is that? But that was Dr. Brown's first product that they started with in 1869 when they opened in Brooklyn. And they really benefit from a kind of craze of seltzer. Dr. Brown soda comes, this is a scholar's written, Dr. Brown soda comes in the middle of seltzer's transition from a medicine to the elite to a beverage of the masses. So you think about the spas like Evian or Spa or Seltzer in Germany that were promoting their naturally carbonated water as a health beverage and something healthy. And then you think of how it migrates over to America when, I mean, people in the 19th century figured out how to carbonate their water, sell it, bottle it, make it a drink for the masses. And the European Jews, they knew of these great health benefits of places that they probably had never gone to, but they'd heard about. And now they were able to get it for a penny. They could get a seltzer down at the pushcart market, maybe get it flavored or something. And Dr. Brown's capitalizes on that and grows with that. Yeah.
We had seltzer delivered, blue glass bottles with
Yeah,
a
yeah,
different
yeah,
top.
yeah.
They, along with the milk that they came in, I lived in Stuyvesant Town. They came into our building and left it outside our door.
Yeah.
When I was a little girl, I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, and the seltzer rage is still going on. My brother, you know, a few years ago, he got a seltzer maker
Oh,
thing in his
yeah,
house,
yeah,
you know.
The Israelis
Yeah.
invented a nice machine that you get little.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, two more things. Oh, yeah. Ratner's menu. 6 different herring options. Matcha herring in a light brine. Pickled herring, schmaltz herring, the herring that's right before it spawns, so it's extra fatty, extra oily. Chopped herring, fried herring, tomato herring. If you think back to Joel Russ or Zabar's or Barney Greengase, they all started with pickled herring. This was the beginning. Because it's a cheap fish, abundant fish, and spawns near the coast. So the history of mankind or humankind eating herring goes back 5,000 years. Everybody's been eating herring because it's convenient. It's these massive balls of schools of fish that you could grab lots of. This is nothing. I was trying to find a good image of like these massive bait balls, they call them. They're just huge. The history of Jews and herring goes back hundreds of years at least. In the 1500s, Jews were buying herring from Dutch fishermen who salted it and put in barrels. Then the Jews became involved in the trade of that as well. They became the fishmongers and the traders, marketing the salted and pickled herring all over the world, including into New York. Here you see some folks, big things of salt, putting it in the barrels. If you think of just dealing with massive quantities of herring. You think about Joel Russ or Louis Zabar or Barney Greengrass, they probably would have used a two-step process to prepare their herring, cured the herring with salt, and then removed the salt by washing them off and adding flavors like vinegar, sugar, peppercorns. Cheap, appealing source of protein, a staple of both the pushcart markets and the Jewish appetizing stores. The other fish I want to talk about, sturgeon. And this one, I'm hoping you can answer the question for me because I'm struggling with it. You heard Joel Russ. He referred to his daughters as sturgeon queens. Barney Greengrass, the subtitle for the store is The Sturgeon King. Murray's Sturgeon Shop. Zabar sells sturgeon. Sturgeon, a delicacy dating back to the 15th century, declared the royal fish in England by King Edward II in 1324, so that nobody except the royalty could eat sturgeon. Similar laws reserving the sturgeon for the monarchy existed in medieval Denmark, enacted probably because of the rarity of these fish, the size of the fish, the mild taste, and the caviar, the roe, that became such a delicacy. In America, most of the sturgeon was lake sturgeon, caught in the Great Lakes. And maybe it's not surprising that you'd think these fish stores in the Lower East Side or in New York on the Upper West Side would sell this royal delicacy of sturgeon. But it is unusual, right? Because sturgeon is not kosher. Sturgeon, you know, to make a fish kosher, you have to have fins and scales. Orthodox Jews today say sturgeon not kosher. In Europe, it was not considered a kosher fish to eat because the scales are ganoid, which is the young sturgeon has scales, but as it grows, a layer goes over the scales, kind of like a fingernail-like material that grows over them called ganoid. And you can't, if you try and scrape off the scales, they won't come off. And so it doesn't really have scales. It has a type of scale, but not considered kosher. So if it's not kosher, why are these Jewish stores selling it? Not only selling it, but highlighting it, putting it in their name. Maybe a sign of the assimilation of the American Jews who were like, it has some kind of scale. Maybe we'll call it good. It's fine for me. Maybe that's it. Maybe because, as a way of these fish stores or these appetizing stores of demonstrating that they were selling a particularly high-quality product. Yeah, they had the pickled herring, but they also had the sturgeon. Maybe it's tied to the democratization of America, the classless society. We don't have the class system of Europe. So the royalty in Europe, here in America, we're all royalty. We all can buy the sturgeon. I don't know the answer.
I am amazed by this because we had a kosher deli near my house that my parents went to. It was definitely a kosher deli, and they sold sturgeon.
Absolutely, absolutely. Today, as I understand it, and maybe Rabbi Wiener can clarify, as I understand it, conservative Jews consider the sturgeon kosher. A lot of Orthodox Jews, though, do not.
Wow. Maybe they ate young ones before this.
Maybe, yeah.
Before they developed their weird scales.
But I find the sturgeon a particularly challenging fish to understand in the way it connects to the Jewish community, and it kind of runs counter to the Jewish roots that I've been talking about. All right, I know I've gone way over time. I apologize to you all. But I hope that I was able to connect a couple of iconic Jewish restaurants to the larger history of Jewish immigration and to the history of New York. and hopefully shared a bit of information about these businesses and these foods that you hadn't heard or had forgotten about by now. Next week, we'll be moving on past the appetizing stores and dairy restaurants to focus on the bagel. So that's coming up.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry to go so long.
No,
No, fascinating.
you know what?
And
Don't say anything that you don't want everyone to hear, because this will continue until 9:30.
Thanks, everybody.
That was great.
that was terrific. Thank you so much.
That would have been difficult to bring samples of.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tony.
Oh, my goodness.
Mark, I'll send an email to the rabbi,
I'll see you tomorrow.
and all these people can still hear this, but, I don't need to make you guys come out, and we can
Oh.
do this virtually for sure.
So how would you do it?
I'm either way,
You could
doesn't
do it
matter to
via
me.
Zoom.
Yeah,
can
we
send
could do it on a Zoom for sure, yeah.
So do you have to come here to do it?
No, you do it from your house.
No, I'm saying you would do it from your house,
Yeah. I mean,
if that works for you.
I'm flexible. I'm happy to come here, but I would urge you not to come in person if you don't want to. It's very kind of you to come out.
Will that be on Zoom or would that be on streaming?
If I came here, I don't know, we can talk about, maybe the
We'll
rabbi
do it
has
on Zoom,
suggested.
so you can ask
Because if
questions.
you're
Yeah.
on Zoom, you see who's
And
Right,
you can ask,
right, you
people
can
can ask
people
questions.
Yeah, yeah. If it's on Zoom though, I might as well do it from my house.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Especially because it's getting cold. I have just passed the point in the year where it's getting too cold.
First of all,
You were
it's
just in
been
Florida.
ridiculous. It's November.
It's been
I
so
know.
It should have been
warm.
cold a long time ago.
I know, and I loved, we can't love global warming, but I like it a little.
Good night.
Good night,
Good
thank you
night.
so much, Dawn.
You know, like you said, it's when, didn't even realize the time.
I mean, we got started a little delayed, of course, but,
First stage it is,
yeah,
just so,
that's all.
Sure,
It's
so.
Jules.
you did a lot of work, a lot of preparation.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
for coming, Mark.
Okay, thank you. I'll see Rabbi tomorrow, so he has a class tomorrow,
Uh-huh.
so I'll discuss it with him.
Yeah.